Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Lovely to have everyone here. It's my first day back, so so we'll see how my brain works. But yes, it is lovely to have everyone here. We are super excited for today's session. We have so many people signed up to hear more about the about our Q&A on the FT Paul McClean graduate scheme. We are joined by some excellent guests this morning. So we have Adele from the recruitment team and Rachel, who actually told me just beforehand that she watched this same webinar, can we call it a webinar Q&A live? I don't know, 2 years ago. So we have got two excellent guests who are able to answer all of your questions. So we have an absolute ton that everyone has submitted in advance. We will get through as many of these as we possibly can. But if you are watching us live, please do pop those into the chat and we will get through as much as we can to give you the best possible chance of putting together your best application. Now, to start off, we are obviously here to talk about the graduate scheme. Adele, shall we kick off with a little bit of an introduction and let's cover off the basics? You can obviously find I'll pop the link in the chat for the actual application on the Journey Resources and the FT website. But maybe you could run us through, how long people have got left to apply, salary, length of scheme, all of those kind of things, just to kick off.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you for joining on the 2nd of January. You have still got time, which is great, to apply. So deadline is next Thursday at 23:59. So do get your applications in. If you could not leave it quite to the 23:59, that would be great. So looking forward to having some applications. So the Paul McClean Graduate Trainee Programme at the Financial Times is running into its 40th year in 2026. Loads of people who have done the program over the years are still in the newsroom, so it shows that it's something that we appreciate in house. And plus, you've got them people all over the world who took part in this. So lots of those famous journalists that you know and love will have come through this program. We still absolutely adore it in house. It is probably our crown jewel of getting people into the FT. We are looking for hungry news reporters. So essentially, if that is you, apply. Obviously, we are the FT, so there is always going to be that kind of onus on it potentially being, financial, economic, business, which absolutely it should. But of course, global affairs, politics, we're really into those subjects as well. So it's that kind of breadth of all of those topics that you know and love through reading the FT. We would be open to applications from people in all of those areas. The program itself is 3 years in total. But the first 2 years are made up of the first 7 weeks is intensive training in-house at the FT, hosted by our journalists. But also we do bring in some external trainers as well, just for some of those extra skills and advice that you might want along the way. That is 7 weeks in-house. You meet every editor, so that first time you go and pitch to them, or the first time you want to go and say, oh, hi, what do work and careers do? You've already met them initially. So that's brilliant. And it's a really nice way of just getting, feeling a bit familiar with our journalists. You then go on 4 6-month rotations, one of which is always markets, which Rachel can tell you about. It feels like that's how you earn your FT stripes, is doing your stint on the markets desk. One tends to be within the industry beats. One is a foreign posting, which I know is a big lure for people. So currently the rotations lately have been New York, DC, San Francisco, Paris, and Brussels. So you're just those small little places that people will have zero interest in. So that's always a really, really fun part of the process. And then the final one tends to be either something that we'd like to see more of you in, something you've really excelled in that we'd really like to push you on, or something where we've got a need. So it's a really nice open conversation. Rachel can go into those kind of details of those kind of conversations that we have with you along the way, where we try and fit it in with your interests as well. So that's the first 2 years. Then the third year, you apply for one of our jobs, which is open for applications. You then discuss with our head of editorial talent whether that is something which could be a trainee role. And just for that final year, you are a trainee, where you're just given that extra bit of guidance for that final year. At the end of that, you are a fully fledged FT journalist and the world is your oyster.
Excellent. What an excellent and comprehensive overview to the scheme, and I think I can safely say there's been a lot of interest, so I'm sure you have a lot to go through. So to move on to the application process,
Mm,
could you maybe had a couple of people asking about, obviously there is this initial first stage.
yep.
Could you run through what that first stage involves, and then if there are any subsequent stages further from that? So maybe
Yeah.
Adele, if you take the first, and then Rachel will come to you next to see how you prepared for those stages that Adele will reveal.
So it is quite a long process, which Rachel can attest to, but that is because we take it really very seriously in-house. A little side note, I get a lot of, people being auto-rejected. Nobody gets auto-rejected from our grad scheme. Every application is read from the point that you send it in as well. So there are no bots and there's no AI. It's all read, which is why we're really, really thorough, which is why it does take a little bit longer. So yeah, first deadline is next Thursday, the 8th of January. We then have a process where we have a panel of 8 senior journalists who read all the applications. So they're given sections to read off. They then select what we call the long list, which is usually about 100 journalists that we move to the long list. We do get hundreds and hundreds, as you can imagine, of applications for this. So we tend to narrow that down to between 80 and 100, which we call the long list, which we usually reveal in about February. You will find out whether you have made the long list and also if you haven't as well. So we don't like to have people lingering at any stage. So you will find out whether you have or you haven't progressed to the next stage. So my expectation is that that would happen around mid-February. You would find out whether you'd made this list or if you haven't. The panels then read all of those 80 to 100. So every one of those is read by every member of that panel. We then sit in a room and they thrash it out to make their top 20. And then we cut that down to 10 people who are invited in for 2 panel interviews. And there is also a writing test as well, which is done under timed conditions. The panel interviews tend to be 2 panels which happen, one of which is very much about the article that you submitted, where you see yourself going, what your interest in journalism is, and the other one tends to be about you, what got you into journalism, where you see yourself going, what kind of things you like to write about. So it gives you that nice, so you can see why we try to go really rounded to work out what people are interested in and what they're here for. Rachel can jump in any moment. The process then after that is that 10 is dropped down to 5, and those final 5 people are interviewed by the editor, Rula Halaf. Yeah, it shows you that absolutely everyone is thoroughly involved in this. So the decision then is Rula's at the end. And then after she has completed those final 5 interviews, we all go into a room and they talk it out. And that is where we make decisions to hire people like Rachel onto the grad scheme.
I feel like maybe it's a bit like low-key terrifying, Rachel. You're like, oh wow, this all happened and they were talking about me. Um, yeah, quite a few stages there, but each one at a time, and also you will be informed at every point. But Rachel, could you've been through this process? Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you prepared for that, or any, I guess, tips for going through that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess kind of, sorry, so there's a bin lorry outside, so if there's any background noise, I'm really sorry about that. I think each stage is a little bit different with I'm sure we'll talk kind of in more depth about the kind of cover letter and the article. But, that first stage, I think is really kind of all about just making your application on paper as good as it can be. With then the interview stage, I think well, at every stage, it's about reading the FT, knowing the FT kind of what sort of topics it covers, how it writes about those things, who writes for the FT as well, always a good thing to know. Kind of, have a sense of like what writers you like, what reporters you like, and what sort of coverage you really admire. And knowing your own application in depth as well. At the interview stage, you get asked about your article, various things like that. Also, how you take it forward. So kind of why you decided to do it on the topic you did it, and then like kind of if you were doing it 3 months on, how would you kind of take that forward? What would you change about it? You kind of discuss various bits of your application basically and various bits of your experience, and also kind of the FT coverage and where you sit within that, I guess, and what you like about it. So I think, yeah, it's very much just about knowing your own experience and knowing how that applies to what the FT does, and then also just knowing the FT. But I think with both interviews, as in the panel interviews and then the individual one, it's you're speaking to such experienced journalists, and with the panel particularly, like such a variety of journalists, that there's just so many people there who are interesting and interested in what you do. So kind of it's daunting, but actually I in a way really enjoyed the panel interviews because it was just an incredible opportunity to go in and chat to these 8 incredibly senior journalists about kind of something that we're all interested in. So yeah.
No, I think that's definitely the approach to take as well, as use that as an opportunity to find out what they think about stuff. And you may not remember this because obviously it was a while ago when you were putting all of this together, but for that kind of first application stage, do you remember roughly like how long you were kind of working on this before you put it in? Obviously, as Dale said, we still have time. But do you have a bit of a benchmark if maybe someone hasn't quite cracked open the laptop yet and they're still eating the chocolates from Christmas?
I think actually, I can't remember exactly how long I took, but in a way, I think the hardest bit about particularly the news article is in a way figuring out what you're going to do. But actually, once you kind of have that down, it doesn't necessarily take that long to do. I mean, it's 500 words. You can kind of write it quite quickly. I'd recommend writing it and then giving yourself a bit of time to come back and reread it and, get people to read it as well. Because it's kind of that kind of gives yourself the distance that to see kind of what works and what doesn't work. But I think a week is plenty of time to apply, I'm sure. And yeah, the tricky thing actually I found was in a way like finding people who were around to talk to you at this time of year, but there's always someone. And as in talk to you about the article, there's always people available, and I just recommend kind of emailing people as soon as possible and just seeing who gets back to you if you haven't already kind of spoken to people for it. But I think it's the sort of thing that takes as long as you kind of have available for it. But yeah, I really recommend giving yourself at least like a day, like kind of writing it and then coming back to it like a day later or so, just to kind of reread and check that things work, and you might want to redraft things and stuff. So yeah.
You could
Awesome.
tap into people feeling quite nice at the beginning of the year, that new kind of thing. Hey, I'm applying for this graduate scheme. Would you happen to give me a quote?
Absolutely. Right. And so talking while we're here, there are obviously three, I guess, kind of parts to that initial application. So you've got your CV, your cover letter, and this news story. We've mentioned the news story a little bit, so maybe let's kick off there because I think that's we've done this event for the past 3 years, and that's the thing that people tend to have the most questions about. So Adele, do you want to maybe give us a little bit of an overview of, I guess, what the purpose is of that story and what you're kind of looking for, and then we can dig into some specific questions. People have a lot of questions about the news story, so I'll try and group them together.
Yeah, of course. So I think Rachel hit the nail on the head there. If you are looking at the FT, so you might not be an FT subscriber. That is fine. But follow us on all our socials and then you can click through, get all the free access to behind paywalls and things like that. Look around topics that you're going to have a look at what we've written about before, in areas that you're particularly interested in. It could be something that, we haven't touched on in a little while that needs an update. It might need a different pair of eyes on something. It could need a younger perspective on a story. So take a look at, articles that you feel comfortable. And as Rachel said, you are going to be asked about this article. So something that you understand, you're knowledgeable about, and are going to be comfortable talking about in March when you're interviewed by a panel, and then again with Ruler. And like Rachel said, following that story as well to keep you going and keep you updated is a really, really good tip there. But essentially, going back to those core things, with the FT, we cover business, politics, global affairs, economics, education, all of those kind of things. So just think about who our readers are, what kind of stories are hitting the front page, what kind of stories make really good stories, are really well read within the FT, which you will see by the stories which are promoted on our socials. And I'm sure you can find, most read stories. Listings, but yeah, things that you're comfortable with, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just finance. However, try and have that kind of idea of what a Financial Times story is. So is there a number that is somewhere part of that story? Is there a figure that is quite central to where that story is going to take you? It could be a political poll, it could be interest rates, it could be any of these kind of things, but just try and think about the interest areas that our readers like.
Awesome. And in terms of the depth, we had a lot of questions around kind of, I guess, what you're looking for in terms of quotes, interviews, data analysis. Are
Yep.
you looking for people to actually go out and speak to someone for this? I think you kind of alluded to the answer to this question already. But people have been asking quite a lot in terms of yeah, how much, I guess, reporting needs to be done and what kind of level of that? Because obviously it's not, we're not looking at a 2,000 word piece here, but
No,
like what's the level we're
exactly.
kind of looking at?
And listen, we're looking for quotes. That's always going to elevate your story. It also keeps you in line with making a news report rather than an opinion piece, and it kind of just gives you that kind of backs up exactly what you're saying. So yeah, I would suggest at least one quote. If you can pop in two, lovely. If somebody doesn't want to be referenced because they're a source, note that. One thing to kind of note on there as well about the article, we have now put in at the bottom of the article, we want 250 words as to why you chose this and how you went about it as well. So in there, if you have got a source who didn't want to be named, you could say, I approached that, they are from X company and I contacted them in this way, but they want to be kept, anonymous, but this way. So then that just gives us that kind of impetus rather than, gosh, please don't make up a quote, to back up your story. So we are looking at that kind of level of detail as well. So that kind of will be looked at as well. So really do think about your thought processes on how you go about doing this. So yeah, I think Rachel and I have talked before about, writing out a plan, rewriting that, how you want the story to go. So actually that's a really nice way if you keep your notes from that to use for that additional piece at the end of the article.
And Rachel, how did you approach this then? We were just chatting before we went, before we pressed the live button about, the stories that we've mentioned in these events before. I think there was one about umbrellas that was previously mentioned that was a piece. But Rachel, how did you come up with an idea? What was your idea? And what did that kind of look like, if you can remember?
So I wrote about Victoria's Secret, the lingerie company, and it was because I felt like, looking at my experience, I knew that one of the things that I lacked that I was going to get asked about was, kind of, I didn't have financial journalism experience. So I wanted to, in a way, kind of show that I could do financial and business journalism from like kind of like my angle. So I was interning actually on one of the FT weekend like supplements at the time, HTSI, which is Luxury Lifestyle. And I remember one day people were talking about Victoria's Secret fashion show being back, and I was like, "That's so funny! I haven't heard about Victoria's Secret in so long." So I kind of kept an eye on like what was going on with it for a little while, and I noticed that the share price was just going up and up, and no one seemed to be like reporting on it. So by the time it got to the application, like applications opened, the share price had gone up by like 160% in 6 months or something, and it just no one was talking about it. And I thought, hang on, this is actually a really good opportunity for me to write a very core FT style piece, fundamentally just a share price piece, but also kind of about quite a fun company, quite fun characters involved. So that was my story. It was basically the news line was that the share price had gone up by this amount as the company was attempting a turnaround. And it basically gave me an opportunity to then like write about kind of the history of the company. And, it's quite a controversial company in some ways. So that was quite fun, quite a fun cast of characters. And, obviously kind of on the core business side, talk about some of the numbers. So like their sales, the share price numbers, obviously. And I spoke to quite a range of people. I spoke to analysts. I contacted the company and got like a couple of quotes. I didn't actually speak directly to the CEO, obviously, but they sent me kind of some comments that she'd made somewhere. And I also went and spoke to people at one of their stores in London just before Christmas, which was actually a horrible experience because Oxford Street was so busy. But I think I kind of wanted to show, once I kind of knew what I wanted to write about, I thought, okay, how can I not only tell this story in the best possible way, but like use this story to show what I can do in a way. So I wanted to show that, I was capable of speaking to analysts, but also kind of, the everyday public in like a Vox Pop style, and, that I could handle numbers and that I could do a chart and stuff. So I kind of, that's it. I wouldn't force anything in that doesn't fit in the story, but I wanted to think, okay, how can I like kind of report this in the most kind of full way possible that also lets me kind of try out whole different types of reporting. And I actually ended up doing a longer piece for the FT after the application about Victoria's Secret, which was quite fun. So yeah, that's it. You can find that online, but that isn't the news article I wrote. It's like a more featuresy piece based on the news article. So don't think that like it should very much be a news article that you submit. But afterwards you can kind of have fun with the topic and do whatever you like for other articles based on it as well.
I love that. I really feel like from all the examples that we've talked about around these news pieces, there's a real lot, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it kind of often feels like, you've got that kind of core of FT journalism there around those, whether it's business, whether it's politics, whether it's what, but there's also that real kind of, I guess, like coffee shop moment as well in a lot of these pieces where it's like you can just imagine saying to someone like, have you seen Victoria's Secret is like actually like big business again, like, so it's like kind of almost about finding that piece that you know someone would say that to and maybe have a little bit of a gossip about. I don't know if I've quite got that right, if you'd agree.
I'd, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, like Rachel said, it's a core FTE subject that you're writing about, but a company that perhaps we haven't written about in quite some time and isn't necessarily your typical everyday FT company that's getting a nod in there, and it's got that kind of element of interest because, like Rachel said, "God, I haven't heard about them in a long time," and that kind of almost like you said, coffee shop going, "Oh, Victoria's Secret," that kind of, "Oh, they're back," you know.
I'm just looking through. So, yeah, we had loads of questions on this. So we've kind of covered here, really, it's very much a news story. So
Yep,
write it like that.
yep.
It is also very much kind of, FT stuff. So we did have a couple of questions around style,
Hmm.
in terms of, do you want this to be written in FT style? Does it have to be a news story? I don't know if you just want to kind of touch on a couple of those style points briefly.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, definitely a news story, but okay, we do timestamp it at the time of applying. Hence why Rachel was able to put hers in, and we timestamped the moment that she'd put that in as being correct as of 3rd of January or whenever that is. So we appreciate that if you're writing something which is really timely today, it might have moved on quite a lot by next week, and definitely by the time you're interviewing in March. So we're really appreciative of that. So we do timestamp them and say, as of then. So what was your other question around that, Gem?
I'm just going to, I've lost it. But
Yeah.
yes, no. So we've time stamped them,
Mhm.
and there was mainly just a couple of questions around style. So you are expecting people to write this in FT house style, and some people have also asked around, it is a news story, but can it
Mm.
be for different parts of the FT? So could you say, this is a news story for this section, or maybe this might go over here? Can you kind of target it at a specific part of the
Yeah,
publication?
I think so. I think as long as it's within the core kind of FT, I would kind of do a little sideline here that, if you're into arts writing, we love arts journalism. FT Weekend is best in the business if you ask me, and it's wonderful. But we have many avenues to go down arts writing. So if you're wanting to get into arts, I would suggest perhaps this isn't the time to be writing about arts. And we work with Creative Access on our FT Weekend magazine internship. We have internships on Life and Arts, HTSI, and Globetrotter. So we do have avenues in for that. I would suggest this wouldn't be the route for arts writing. But yeah, I would take a look. We've had pieces in the past which have actually been quite fitting into the politics pages, fitting into the education pages, fitting into business of education, sport. We've even had we've got an excellent business of sport section as well. So all of those kind of areas. So I wouldn't flag it yourself where you think this should appear. We've got a brilliant panel of journalists who would make that decision. But like Rachel said, it's those kind of a little bit, this is where I could see that appearing. So have a look at the broad range of things that the FT covers and kind of go, so it doesn't necessarily have to sit, on the homepage in this particular section. It could be within the breadth of the FT.
Excellent.
And I
Well, I'm
think,
gonna. Oh, sorry. Did
but
I cut
just
you off? Go for it.
on the style thing, I think not only read the FT, but find articles that are similar to the sort of thing you're writing about and see how they write about that. News articles, that is. Like a share price article, for example, the FT, like there's a certain way of approaching that. The
Mhm.
numbers are talked about in a certain way. And if you're able to kind of model yours on another example, that will just kind of, yeah, make it better. So obviously don't do that kind of formulaically, but just to get a sense of kind of how the FT writes about that specific topic as well as kind of more broadly.
And if you're writing about share prices, you could always look at Rachel's pieces herself because she's on the markets desk.
Earning her FT stripes. Now, I am conscious of time, so I do want to make sure that we get to talk about some of these other parts of the application. But if anyone has any further burning questions about the pitch or story, please do keep popping them into the chat. But there are obviously two other, parts. You've got your CV and your cover letter there. And we had a couple of questions around, kind of what you would expect around how to make that application A stand out. And what you're kind of looking for from that. So Adele, I don't know when you're in that kind of like first sift to get to the long,
Yeah.
whether there are some things that you're maybe looking for or things that how people approach it that maybe
Yeah,
you could help.
I think Jem, you and I over the years have definitely talked about our love of cover letters, haven't we? I think it's such a brilliant, brilliant way of really selling yourself in a way that your CV doesn't. Listen, we've all got CVs, and some of you will have really similar CVs to each other. So whilst that's great to have on paper, this is what I can do. There's something about a cover letter that really tells us about you, and I think it's a really nice way of listen. We're going to have your story, and we're going to have your CV. It's a really nice way to show us something a little bit different about you, and it's quite nice if you reference something that you're proud of that you've written about, or something that you've achieved with your writing. And that doesn't necessarily mean having been on a massive internship at one of the other big publications. It could be a story that you wrote for a student publication that really meant something to you or really changed somebody's opinion. So that's quite a nice touch. Something I think that we've also talked about, and I know that Rachel and I have talked about quite a lot, is how that process is done. Listen, if they don't like your story, they're not reading the rest of your application. So the story really is the killer piece here. My understanding that cover letter is there next, so we get a bit of an understanding as to why you've written about that, what kind of drives you. CV, listen, we've all got CV. It's kind of the last part that we read, because essentially that just gives us the basics, the tick box. I would say really nice, fresh, crisp CV. If you can keep it at page, brilliant. On there, anything that you couldn't fit into the cover letter. So languages that you speak. God, we love a language at the FT. Data skills as well. Everything, even those things. Oh no, everyone knows that. Pop it on there. It's always good for us just to go, oh, but this person can also read Python. And all these kind of things. Social media skills now as well. So if you're confident in, as I am not, but so I'm really pleased that Jem and Jack have put us here on Insta Live. If you're really quite confident in using your social media skills as well, pop that on there under your listings as well. So keep it to a page, your CV, but make sure it's all those really core points that you want to get across. Cover letter, again, try and keep it to a page, but really, we know that this is application season. So we know that you're sending this to everyone. Try and make it a little bit different. Something that why you'd be great at the FT, why we should hire you, but also, what you could bring that makes you authentically yourself as well. So, whether that's you're from a particular background, you speak these languages, you've traveled, all of those kind of things all, make a really nice cover letter and get us to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, I think that was going to be my follow-up question is that, a lot of people have asked specifically around the cover letter around what
Mm,
skills you're looking for. But
mm.
is this also a bit of I guess, kind of a mixture of here are the skills I have, but also about you and what your motivations are? Like, is this a
100%.
chance to get to know you?
100%. In my view, your skills, stick them on the CV. This is the point where you really tell me what you are going to bring to the FT, who you are as a person. I think it's a really nice way to get that across, because essentially that's what's going to get you over into that interview, which is then where you sell yourself even more in person. But to get you to that point, we want to know what the kind of person is that is applying for this.
And this maybe seems like a good point to touch on generative AI, seeing as we're talking about cover
Mm.
letters, and the FT is very clear. There are some very specific
Yep.
guidelines on the application, but I wonder if it could be worth you mentioning those now. We did have a couple of questions about whether or not you can use AI tools in that kind of application, whether that helps or hinders you. So take it
Okay,
away.
can I be one really clear? Love technology and we write brilliant things. Please do not use AI for any part of this application. Your skill that you're bringing to us is as a journalist, you're a wordsmith. Words are what are your skills here. Please, please write this from the heart. Write your article as you're writing, because essentially, as Rachel can attest, on day, during this, I think Rachel, you went out and wrote some articles even during your training weeks, didn't you? In those first 7 weeks, you are going to be thrown out there. There is going to be no time to use generative AI. You could be turning around a story in a matter of hours. We want to know that you can do that. And I think you'd be short selling yourself as well if you were using that. So pretty please don't use it, I guess.
And it's that payoff, right? Though it's like, everyone's, I think, everyone can have confidence from watching this that, real people at the FT are going to read this application. So it's kind of in return, please do it
Yeah,
yourself.
I for one read every application, so I will read every single one of these that you send through. Please give me the joy of reading about you and not very, very similar applications.
Yeah, I think that's the thing from obviously I don't read them, but I do read our applications for our fellowship, and I think you can start to get a sense that a lot of things are the same. And I think if the purpose of that cover letter is really to get to know you, you
Mm.
really can't do that if you're not doing it. Cool. Okay. Just looking in a couple of questions in the chat, so we'll just you know tick these off. Goodness me. 2nd of January, brain's already falling apart. So someone says, just to be clear, should we discuss our article and why we wrote about the subject in the cover letter as well, or is that just in the 250 word supplement?
No, I'd pop that in at the bottom of the supplement. Don't use up that vital space in the cover letter to talk about a story which you're going to talk about at the end.
And then also, just to be clear, we obviously talked about that news story being timestamped when it went in.
Mhm.
And someone has said, I've written my story but not submitted it. The news around the topic has now changed. Can I still submit it or should I rewrite it so it's up to
Yep,
date?
absolutely. Of course. If you've written it, get it in today. And no harm after this conversation popping that in. But yeah, look, we appreciate that you also would have taken some people might have taken weeks on this, or might have been waiting for that quote. So when the story was ready and you were waiting for that quote, things have moved on. Absolutely fine.
Awesome. And Rachel, on that CV and cover letter, before we round off with some questions from the experience section, which there are many of, was there anything that you wanted to add that you had in mind when you were putting together that CV and cover letter?
I think, especially on the cover letter, as you said, this is kind of application season. The cover letter you write for the FT is not going to be the same that you would write for another UK national newspaper. The FT is different in some ways. It considers itself more of an international paper. It has quite a big international audience. And of course, it's a financial newspaper. That doesn't mean that you have to have a ton of financial journalism experience. But if you don't kind of acknowledge that in the cover letter, I think, people that you're kind of harming yourself. So I think you need to acknowledge, that it's an international paper and kind of talk about where you fit within that, whether that's languages or, just an interest in kind of global affairs. And you need to kind of at least acknowledge that it's a financial publication, even if that's just to say, I don't have much experience, but, I did this little thing, or, I'd really love to learn more through the training. I mean, I did not have, a ton of financial experience. So what I was saying more was, I really look forward to having a placement on the markets desk, as and stuff like that. I was talking about kind of the ways in which I could link things that I'd done to that finance side. But yeah, don't acknowledge the things that makes the FT a bit different, and kind of make sure you get a sense of like why you therefore want to work at the FT and kind of what skills you bring to those aspects, I'd say.
That is a really helpful answer because we had a ton of varying different questions around experience. So maybe this is a good time to touch on that. So yeah, many people asking around, how much journalism experience they need, how much maybe specifically finance and business experience they need, and also some people asking, we had 3 or 4 questions in advance around how much experience counts outside of journalism as well. So I don't know, there's obviously that's 3 in 1 there. But I guess what you're kind of looking for from that experience, or how you should talk about it in terms of, yeah, how much journalism experience you're expecting people to have. Do they necessarily need to have done finance business before? And is it worth talking about some things that you may have done outside of a journalism lens that may
Yeah,
bring you skills?
definitely. So, Jem, I know you're a huge advocate for student journalism, and we love student journalism. So, if that's the only experience you have, shout about it. We love student journalism because it gives you that kind of process of this is why I enjoy it. Some people might not have even turned to journalism until maybe they've gone to uni and realised that it was for them. So, we really, really like that. So, you might not have examples of work at other publications and things, but if you've got student journalism, include that. Excellent. Do you have to have business and finance experience? No, you don't. But you do, as Rachel just said, need to show an interest in there and how you could turn that experience and interest you do have into business and finance journalism. So no, you don't need to, have worked a trade publication or anything like that on an internship. Other skills, great. If you can show us that, you're really interested in this because. So I think in the past we've had people who were able to really develop their language skills. So somebody I'm really remembering vividly had travelled to South America for a year and really used their language skills and got connections there. So that's a really nice thing to be able to sell and be able to say about yourself as well, that you took yourself off, developed your Spanish and were able to, are really confident in reporting in Spanish. That's a great skill to have. You could have dabbled in something else in the year or two since you left university. If that's got something which can link you back to the FT, great. You might have, tried your arm in finance yourself, or banking, or something like that, or politics. We've had a fair few people who've, gone down the politics route and, reverted after that year as well. So yeah, absolutely, all those kind of experiences do count. So do talk about them.
And we've had talking about what you may or may not be doing. You know, is the scheme open to, how much experience is too much experience, basically. So,
Yeah,
some
you can't
people
have done a grad scheme in anything anywhere else. And by that we don't mean internships as well. Rachel's interned before. Internships absolutely fine, but it's where you are doing that a little bit more than an internship, where they're actually giving you full on training, where you are getting a qualification due to the program that you're on. Love the NCTJ as well, so that's absolutely fine. We count that as going towards, that wouldn't be held against you. Yeah, and just internships that you can get, that just shows that you've been out there in the industry and have been trying.
someone's asked, at what point might I be too old for the scheme? Is there such a thing?
It's an icky ground. I think I've always looked at this insofar as, when you what would you consider yourself a graduate? If you were applying for something yourself and you were up against people, how far ahead would you think that, because it's right for you, would you have thought was fair when you were around that kind of age? So it's that starting out kind of time. So listen, I would say no more than 4 years post graduation would be considered. And I think probably within every industry, you'd kind of go, actually, if you're pushing 5, 6, 7 years, you're probably not a graduate. You probably wouldn't get a graduate bank account and those kind of things using that. So listen, a little bit of time out of the industry, out doing other things, brilliant. And actually you can find that that's a really nice way to develop yourself, whether you do take that year out, whether you do go into another industry, whether you do a few internships just to build up those skills.
Awesome. And we are almost at time, so I'm just going to do this as a call out. If anyone else does have any questions that they want to pop in, I can see we're getting a little bit of a last minute flurry, so these next questions might be a little bit random, gang. Um, but yes, so maybe similar. You mentioned the NCTJ. Someone has asked if it's okay to have done a graduate degree in journalism. I think we've kind of answered this already, but
Yep, absolutely fine. And also on the flip side of that, it's also not necessary to have done that as well. So yes, fine, but not a prerequisite.
awesome. And I guess just in terms of some, you mentioned a second ago, things that had stood out. You mentioned that cover letter where someone was talking about those language skills. Is there anything else that, in terms of, I'm always, you can mention things that stand out in a bad way if you like, but is there anything else just as those kind as we reach the closing stages, just any practical tips or pieces of advice that you would recommend people take forward as they start to pull all of this together and refine it?
Oh, God, typos. Oh, please reread. Check your telephone number, that you've actually put the right telephone number in. Check your email address, that you've submitted that correctly. Spell McClean right. That is, people spell McClean wrong all the time. Little details like that. Spell check everything. I think Rachel's advice was great, as in get somebody else to read over it as well. With your cover letter too. All of those kind of things. Get it in on time. Yeah, really use this as an opportunity. And like I said, I, for one, will be reading all of them, and going through. All the panel will be reading this, so something might jump out at somebody. So this is a real good time to get your work in front of someone.
Rachel, anything you would have done differently, or if you were approaching this again now, what would you tell your past self?
Ooh, I can actually, because I actually applied twice. So the first year, I obviously didn't get it.
I didn't
But
want
I
to
think
mention it, Rachel, but you brought it up. It's fine.
quite a lot of people on the grad scheme did apply multiple times. So don't get put off if you apply before and be rejected. But I think that like reapplying really let me see kind of what my first application was missing. And I think really kind of having that news focus, like this is fundamentally a news reporting grad scheme, and particularly some of the panelists are really going to just be looking for a news reporter. Like they're not interested in the panel's very like varied, but if you don't want to be a news reporter, this is like not the scheme for you. So I think, yeah, making sure you stress that in your CV and cover letter, and yeah, I think that's the main one that I would say.
Awesome. And one final question from the chat, around that kind of experience question, Adele, around is it okay to have worked in kind of a trade publication, or would that
Yeah.
be?
Yeah, lovely. You're not going to be a senior reporter at a trade magazine. I think that would have given you lots of experience along there. But of course, doing a year at a trade magazine, actually, it's really good grounding, and particularly on FT topics. Super.
Yeah. And I really, really valued what you said there, Rachel. That is my around kind of applying again. My general rule for life is just keep applying for things until someone gives it to you. So even if I've had to apply like 4 times in a row, like don't be put off if you applied for this last year. And I think there's a real value in getting out that application from previous years, getting the red pen out, and with the benefit of like a little bit of time and hindsight, you can go, oh, actually, maybe I changed this or do that. So I think that's really good advice. Okay, so some final tips to close then. Where can we find out more? I know we mentioned this at the beginning, but Adele, you also mentioned if people were interested in the more arts journalism stuff, where can people expect to find those schemes? Where can we find out more about this particular scheme? And a reminder of that closing date.
Yes. So ft.com/about us, and then there is an early careers drop down. I'll be honest, a couple of the dates are slightly wonky, but they will be updated soon. So do have a look on there. If you go onto the homepage and you search Paul McClean, the graduate scheme will come up, and that's McClean. MClean. So that will come up. Deadline is next Thursday, 23:59 on the 8th of January. And apply and just enjoy writing it as well. Use it as a good experience, especially if maybe you are somebody who is literally graduating this summer. Get an application out there, as Rachel did. Get that application and just give it a go. And and like Jem, you're totally right. Reapplying with a year's worth of experience is a great way to look back, and maybe you find yourself a bit more prepared then as well.
Excellent. And we will also, so everyone who signed up for a ticket for this in advance, we have an excellent guide which also has some further insights from Adele. I think we've got Steffi from last year before, can't quite remember.
Yeah,
But yeah,
2 years ago, Steffi is
2 years
crikey.
ago, that's
And
blind.
she's one of your alumni as well, isn't she,
Yes,
Steffi?
Jenna is also fellow. So yeah, fingers crossed. What we're hoping for is that someone watching this right now is going to be one of the next FT grads. So excellent. I think we're broadly at time. So thank you so much. Please do, yeah, head to our site, head to the FT site, and yeah.
Any further questions that you think of that you didn't pop in here, if you email graduate.journalist@ft.com, I'll be taking a look at that again later today and next week. So any last minute questions, do ping them over.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much and have a lovely rest of your week and weekend.
Take care.